I didn't find out from them. I found out from a florist. I was picking up dried lavender from a local shop when the woman behind the counter smiled and said, "You're the Carter girl, right? Your family's ordering peonies by the crate for that big wedding next weekend. You must be thrilled." I blinked. "What wedding?" Her face dropped. "Oh, sorry, I thought." She trailed off. I paid for the lavender and walked out. At first, I thought maybe she had the wrong Carter family. But I knew better. There's only one in our town with enough money and ego to need crates of imported flowers. When I got home, I didn't text my brother. I didn't call my mother. I waited. And 2 days later, Mom finally messaged. Not an invitation. A sentence. "It's just a small wedding, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." No, sorry. No explanation. Just a smirk tucked between words. The same tone she used when I didn't get into NYU. When my engagement ended. When my job offer in Boston fell through. Like she was always a little pleased when things didn't go my way. I stared at the message for a while. Then drove over. They were setting up patio lights when I arrived. My mother, fussing with centerpieces. My father, stringing wires in silence like he'd forgotten how to speak years ago. She saw me and gave that tight, glossy smile she saves for strangers and women she pretends to like. "I figured you'd hear eventually," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's nothing personal. We just needed to keep it small." My brother? He didn't even come out of the house. And Dad, he looked at the ground like it was safer than looking at me. I didn't ask why. Didn't argue. Didn't beg. I just smiled. And I said, "Thanks for making it easy." Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove to the airport. One way to Reykjavik. Booked before I even packed a bag. They wanted a wedding without me? Fine. I'd give them silence, so loud it echoed. My name is Elena Carter. And from wherever you're watching this video, stay with me. Because sometimes when people leave you out, they're really just clearing space for the life you're meant to build. It wasn't just the wedding. That was just the final, polished insult. The ribbon on top of decades of being told, quietly, consistently, that I was optional. Growing up, my brother, Mark, was the center of gravity in our house. Golden boy grades, varsity sports, that effortless charisma that makes people forgive things they shouldn't. When he failed algebra in 10th grade, my mom blamed the teacher. When I got an A in the same class, she said, "Of course you did. You're good with boring stuff." Mark got a used car at 17. I got a ride to my job at the library. Once, when I brought home a poetry award from state finals, she smiled and said, "How sweet. Did they give those to everyone?" I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their approval. But children believe what they're shown. And I learned early that praise had conditions and I didn't meet them. After college, I moved in with my fiancé, Nate. He was kind, steady, safe. We were building a life. Until we weren't. One morning, he said, "I don't know if I can do this forever." And by sunset, he was gone. Left a note, half of his clothes missing, and a quiet apology. I called my mother that night. Voice raw, heart hollow. She said, "Well, maybe it was for the best. Maybe you just weren't enough for him." I remember holding the phone and thinking, oh, so this is what drowning sounds like when no one even notices the splash. I didn't argue, didn't scream. I just stopped calling, because there comes a point where silence stops being passive. It becomes armor. And I wore it well. Years passed. I built a life that wasn't glamorous, but was mine. I taught literature at a small community college. I hiked on Sundays. I wrote poems I never showed anyone. And I smiled at weddings that weren't mine. But the pattern stayed. Christmas invitations that accidentally came late. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Group texts that conveniently skipped my name. And now, being excluded from the wedding? That wasn't a shock. It was a confirmation that they had already written me out of the story long before the RSVP list was even printed. But here's the thing. You can only be cut out of something if you're still trying to fit in. And somewhere on that plane to Iceland, as clouds swallowed the sky beneath me, I realized I wasn't grieving my family anymore. I was grieving the version of myself that kept hoping they'd change. Iceland wasn't on some dream list. I didn't pin it to a board or circle it in a guidebook. I picked it because it felt like the farthest place from the noise. No family, no wedding, No smiles I had to fake. Just sky, ice, silence. I arrived the morning of the rehearsal dinner. My mother had posted a photo, her in pearls captioned, "The weekend begins." I stared at it while the plane taxied, then turned my phone off and didn't turn it back on for days. I stayed in a cabin, tucked between two black hills. The kind of place where the air feels like it's never been breathed before. There were no TVs, no room service, just a wood stove with blankets and windows that swallowed the sky. At night, I sat near the fire and listened to the wind beat against the walls. During the day, I hiked through snow fields, saw geysers hiss like angry ghosts, and stood alone in a glacier cave so blue it looked like the sky had been frozen mid-breath. And slowly the ache began to thaw. Not all at once, but piece by piece. I didn't cry on the first night. I cried on the third, while eating soup by myself, watching steam curl up from the bowl like it was trying to leave too. I wasn't crying because I missed them. I was crying because I'd spent so long begging to be seen. I forgot what it felt like to look at myself, to ask, who am I when I'm not trying to earn a seat? Who am I when I'm not being compared, edited, erased? I'd given so much love to people who rationed theirs like it was currency, so much loyalty to people who used silence as a blade. And now I was here, in the cold, and for the first time I didn't feel frozen. I felt awake. There's something sacred about removing yourself from the center of pain. Not to run, but to remember you can still move. I climbed a ridge the morning of the wedding, watched the sun rise through snow-dusted clouds, and said out loud to no one but the wind, I'm not sorry I left. Because I didn't leave a family. I left a room where love was conditional. And I wasn't going back. I posted the first photo just before their ceremony started. It wasn't planned. I wasn't trying to make a point. But sometimes truth doesn't knock, it just shows up. It was a shot of me standing at the edge of a black sand beach, wind in my hair, arms out like I was holding up the sky. My cheeks were flushed pink from the cold. My coat was open. I looked alive. Caption: Thank you, Iceland, for reminding me how small pain feels when you're standing in something this wide. I tossed my phone on the table and went back to my tea. Didn't check notifications. Didn't think twice. By evening, there were over 400 likes. By morning, it was over 1,000. Messages from old college friends. Comments from coworkers. Even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. You look incredible. Wow, what a trip. Wait, weren't you supposed to be at a wedding? That last one came from someone who knew my brother. Someone who'd been invited to the event I was deliberately left out of. I didn't respond. Instead, I posted again. An ice cave glowing cerulean blue, like it was lit from within. Then a snow-covered cliff at golden hour. Then me, mid-laugh, hair tangled. Eyes full of something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. I never mentioned my family. Never said a bitter word. But absence is loud. And so is joy, especially when it doesn't come from the place people thought you needed. By the time they cut the cake, my mother's perfect weekend post had fewer comments than my glacier reel. By the time they toasted, people were whispering. Someone asked my cousin why I wasn't there. She shrugged and said, I think they told her not to come. The bride's aunt, a woman I hadn't seen in a decade, messaged me privately. Your photos, they're stunning. And I just want to say I'm sorry. I didn't ask for sympathy. But truth has a way of making its own introductions. My mother posted a group photo the next day. Family is everything, she captioned it. Someone commented underneath. Isn't Elena family? That comment disappeared within the hour. But I saw it, and I smiled. Because this wasn't about clapping back or burning bridges. It was about being fully, visibly, unapologetically absent and letting that echo louder than any entrance ever could. You don't notice who's missing until people start asking. And they did start asking. The night of the reception, while champagne glasses clinked and sparklers fizzed in curated photos, I was walking across a frozen lake, bundled in wool, listening to snow crunch beneath my boots. The quiet was perfect. But back home, my silence was causing noise. My cousin texted me in the middle of the night. Aunt Joanne asked where you were. Loudly. Your mom's face? Red as her wine. Apparently, several guests assumed I was running late. Then someone whispered. She wasn't even invited. That whisper turned into a question. That question turned into a storm. By dessert, it was the only thing people wanted to know. Where's Elena? Why wasn't she here? Was there a falling out? My absence outshined the flowers. The bride, my new sister-in-law, who'd barely met me once at a family barbecue, messaged me directly that night. Hey, Elena, I just found out you weren't invited. I had no idea. I thought the list was complete. I'm so sorry. I stared at the message, read it twice, then set my phone down. Let it sit. She wasn't to blame, but I wasn't going to untangle their mess either. The next morning, my mother called. Twice. The first went to voicemail. The second, I answered. Her voice came through like a breeze that wanted to sound warm. Elena, she said, stretching it out like sugar on her tongue. We were just thinking about you. Everything's over now, and, well, it felt a little empty without you there. I didn't say anything. She continued. You know, we only meant to keep it small. Things just got complicated. I hope you understand. I took a breath. Let the glacier outside the window remind me how sharp stillness can be. Then I said, you made it clear where I stand. So I stood somewhere else. Silence. Then she said, you don't have to be cruel. I almost laughed. I'm not being cruel, I replied. I'm being honest. And I've never seen any of you handle that well. She mumbled something about talking later. I ended the call before she could finish. That was the last time we spoke. Not because I'm angry. Because I'm finished. There's a difference. And it took standing in sub-zero air for me to finally feel warm. Her name was Maren. We met at a geothermal pool on my 5th day in Iceland. I was reading a book half submerged in steam when she floated over and said, That's the loneliest book I've ever loved. I smiled. We started talking. She was from Copenhagen, a photographer, here with her partner, Lise. They were loping in 2 days, just them, a guide in the wind. You should come, she said casually. I blinked. I don't even know you. She shrugged. That's never stopped kindness. So I said yes. On the day of their ceremony, we met near a ridge overlooking the coast. Black cliffs. Sky so wide it made your lungs feel infinite. Maren wore a navy wool coat with copper buttons. Lise wore ivory gloves and snow in her lashes. There was no aisle, no DJ, no audience, just love, standing bare against the wind. They exchanged vows in Danish, their voices quiet but sure. Lise cried. Maren wiped her tears. Then they laughed and kissed like no one had ever told them love had rules. I didn't cry until later, when Maren handed me a piece of warm bread and said, You feel like someone who needed to see this. She was right, because for the first time, I wasn't watching love perform. I was watching it belong. No hierarchy, no shame, no people pretending you mattered just enough to decorate a room. It made me realize I'd been fighting for a seat at someone else's table, a table where I was only invited when it looked good for them. But here, on this freezing cliff with strangers who wrapped me in a wool blanket and poured tea into my shaking hands, I didn't have to earn my place. I just had to be. That night, I journaled for the first time in months. I don't need to be let in anymore. I will build something of my own. It won't be grand, but it will be honest. The wedding I was excluded from, it taught me what family isn't. This moment, it showed me what love could be. And that felt like more than healing. It felt like beginning. The first thing I noticed when I got back wasn't how familiar everything felt. It was how small it did. My apartment was the same. The city was the same. But I wasn't. I unpacked slowly, folded sweaters that still smelled like wood smoke, hung up photos from the trip, mountains, strangers, skies that held space for me when no one else had. Then I did something simple. I opened the windows. All of them. Let light fill every corner that used to feel dark. A week later, a package arrived at my door. No note, no warning, just a white box wrapped in silver paper. I opened it halfway before I realized what it was. Wedding favors. A custom candle with their names engraved. A thank you card addressed to Elena. A slice of preserved wedding cake. They had sent it anyway, as if to pretend I had been there. I closed the box, walked it down to the donation center, and left it on the steps. Because I don't accept gifts that arrive dressed in denial. 2 days later, my inbox lit up. From Mom. Subject: talk? Body: I know you're still upset. I'd like to clear the air. Maybe we can start fresh. Family is family. I didn't reply. A few hours after that, my phone buzzed. Mark. His first message in over a year. You were missed. I stared at it for a while. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Then I typed, I wasn't, and turned off my phone. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I made tea, sat on the floor by the window, watched the tide roll in, slow and certain. Everything I used to chase, their approval, their closeness, their apologies, no longer fit who I had become. I wasn't empty. I wasn't bitter. I was full, in a quiet, complete kind of way. And the only thing missing from my life now was the version of me who thought she had to prove she belonged. 1 year to the day. The air is cold, but not cruel. The sky is soft, barely lit by a sunrise still stretching into itself. I'm sitting on a quiet beach just outside my new town, a place by the water where mornings arrive like apologies you no longer need. I brought a journal with me, the same one I carried to Iceland, the same one I nearly threw away last spring, before I remembered I had more to say. I write slowly now, not to bleed, just to breathe. I don't dream of being let in anymore. I dream of who I'll let in, of dinners with laughter, not comparison, of holidays that don't feel like tests, of mornings like this, where no one expects me to shrink just to be welcome. I pause, look out the water, and smile, because this stillness, this steadiness, is the life I never knew I was allowed to want. Ava, my neighbor's daughter, calls me Annie Elena now. She brings me wildflowers in jam jars and asks if I'll braid her hair before school. I say yes always. That's chosen family. A man I met in a bookstore last month asked me to dinner. He listens when I speak, doesn't flinch when I pause. We're not rushing. I told him I'm learning to trust peace. He said, take your time. I'll still be here. That's honest love. And as for the family I left, they still gather, still send birthday texts without my name, still edit me out of the story like I was a typo. But I don't read their chapters anymore, because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the decision to stay gone, not out of anger, but out of respect for who you're becoming. I close the journal, let the wind turn the last page, and I say one final thing, not out loud, just in the place that finally feels like home. I am not waiting for permission to be whole. I am already here, and that is enough.